Hi, welcome to the Pearls and Polish podcast, episode 60. I'm your host, Rachel, coming to you from just outside Sacramento, California. Next to me off screen is my puppy, Sabine. She's our 1-year-old schnoodle. She is happily chewing on a bone, so if you hear some big crunching sounds, that's her chewing on her bone. She did not want to be left out of today's episode, so she's hanging out with us today. If you are a new viewer, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe so that you know when we have another episode. Currently, we are putting out an episode every week, which has been great. But life happens and sometimes we might have to skip an episode. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you know when an episode comes out. Let's get started with where you can find me. I am on Instagram and Ravelry, and links to those are in the description below, along with all the links to designers, dyers, yarn shops, anyone I mentioned in today's episode. If you want to find them, they're probably linked below. So check that out. And let's get started. Starting with finished objects. So I finished my Love in the Air socks. That was the January colorway for Freckled Whimsy's Yarn of the Month Club. I don't know what the official name is, but I'm doing her yarn club for the 2025. So when I showed them to you last week, they, I think, just needed the toes. I was practically done. So those socks are done. I think I finished them the day that I recorded, which is great. So I don't have them to show you here because they are already blocked and put away. But if you aren't doing a yarn club and you would like to do a yarn club, check out Freckled Whimsy's. It's only been a month, but I've really enjoyed it so far. So there is that. So we're going to get started with works in progress, whips. If you hear Sabine barking, someone just got home. So she's sounding the alarm that someone new is in the house. She is mostly Schnauzer, and Schnauzers tend to be very loud. So if you have interacted with a Schnauzer, you know. But let's get back to socks. These are my Encyclopedia of Fairy socks. This is a yarn dyed by Nomadic yarns, and I've showed you this last week, but I'll show you again. That's the tag, and that's the back. This is on her Tweety sock base, 438 yards, 100 grams, 85% superwash BFL, and 15% Donegal nips. So tweed, I feel like you have to be in the right mood for tweed, or at least I have to be in the right mood for tweed. I love tweed. I love how it looks. I love how it feels. But when it comes to working with tweed, I have to be in the right mood. And I was definitely in the right mood when I cast these on because the first sock is completely done. One of the things I love about self-striping yarn is that I feel like it knits up quickly. Because I'm always like, oh, I'll do one more color and one more color and one more color. And next thing you know, you've done 12 colors. And so you get through it quickly. This sock is a 3x1. Yeah, a 3x1 rib. So I knit 3 and I purl 1. So that way I have some stretch. I wanted to keep the colors intact. So I put in an Afterthought heel, which is where you cut the yarn in the middle, take it apart, and then put your heel in, and then you sew all your ends in. But because I like the fit of a heel flap and gusset best, I needed something with a little extra stretch so I wouldn't feel too tight in kind of this instep, which is why I went with a rib, because I really wanted the tweed to just kind of be the star of the show. So first sock is done. Super pretty. I'll show you the back. I really do love how it is just in plain stock knit. And when I got to the foot, I kind of half regretted doing a rib, but at the same time, to keep the integrity of the stripes, I didn't have a lot of choices. So I'm glad with the choices that I made with my sock. If you missed last week's episode, I go through a lot of my thought process before I cast on a pair of socks and all the things I think about before I even start my socks. So if you want to hear about all of that, check out last week's episode. I'll tag it up above. And you can find out more about kind of my process when I start a pair of socks. So second sock has been started. I am almost to kind of that middle point. So this bigger charm is from Hello Lavender. I think this is one of her leftovers. But that's kind of where I'm marking where I need to start my heel. So I'll put some pins in to remind myself which stitches I need to pick up. And then I will just go straight all the way through to the toe, because I know where my heel is going to go and I know how many rows I have until I need to start my toe. So I don't have to put it in halfway through my sock. So I imagine these will be done by next week, hopefully. Like I said, these have been going by really quickly, so I don't anticipate this taking a long time. Of course, I'm doing these socks for the self-striping New Year's Eve make-along. There we go. Hosted by Comfy Cozy Knits. I talked about this last week, but it's going from December 31st, 2024, all the way to February 28th, 2025. This will be my second entry. My third entry will be my February socks for Freckled Whimsy, and I might have another self-striping that's coming in that I can do for that as well. So really loving having a reason to pull out my self-striping yarn right away. Next up are some socks that I showed you the yarn for last week, but I hadn't started them. My sister asked for some thick DK socks. I've made her a pair before and she really likes them, but she only has the one pair. So she asked for some more. She went through my stash and she pulled out all of like my neutral colors, and she likes neutral socks, not a ton of flash, where I like a lot of flash and color in my socks, because I tend to wear darker colors kind of up here. So she pulled out all of my neutrals, which was great because I was struggling to find projects for those colors. So this works out perfectly. So I cast on my socks for my sister, and I'm using two colors. I'll show you these first. So this one is called Cottage Loaf, and it is like the perfect light brown, like light tan, I would call it. It's very taupey, maybe. But this is Woolberry, and this is on her Berry Cozy sock base. So 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, 400 yards, 100 grams. That came with one of the book clubs from last year. And then this colorway is Chip, and this is also tweed, and this is on her buried tweed base. So 85% superwash merino, 15% neps, 437 yards, 100 grams. So both by Woolberry, and I think these go along really well. I was a little nervous about how they would mix. However, when you see them together in the sock, it blends beautifully. They both have kind of that really light tan base, which is why they blend so nicely. Let's talk about the yarn base that these are on. For the most part, I try not to mix yarn bases. So if I have something that's superwash merino, I'm not going to mix it with non-superwash, whether it's merino or another breed. If I have merino, I probably won't mix it with BFL just because they're two different yarns and they can behave differently. These are both superwash merino. The only difference is that Cottage Loaf, the light taupey brown, the tonal, this one, is 80%. This one, Chip, is 85%. So that 5% I don't feel is going to make a ton of difference. This one does not have any nylon, but it has the little neps in it, which makes the tweed. This one does have nylon. With socks, I prefer yarn that has nylon in it just so it lasts a little longer, but it's not a end all be all for me. I have socks that are made out of yarn that does not have nylon and they work fine. I have socks that are made out of non-superwash. They've not been treated and they have been beautiful too. So it's not a huge deal breaker for me, but these are close enough in base where I don't worry about how the yarn's going to react once it gets wet or once it gets warm. So I'll show you this sock again. This is actually the cuff. I'm doing cuff down, so it actually would go this way. So cuff, heel flap and gusset, and then I'm almost to the toe. This pattern is the High Desert Socks by Lindsey Fowler. One of my most favorite sock patterns, one of my most favorite designers just in general. I think at last count I've made 16 pairs of High Desert Socks. I love this pattern. I think it's written really well. It's written for a ton of different sock sizes, so you could knit DK socks for the littles in your life, you can knit DK socks for the bigs in your life. And it also gives you opportunities to use minis, because the original pattern is written with some stripes. Here in the cuff, you use a mini here in the cuff up here, in the heel flap, and then in the toe. So I'm deviating a little bit from the original pattern because I'm not using a bunch of minis. I'm actually just using 2 separate colors. The pattern is originally written where you use one color held double and then you use the minis to kind of supplement, to kind of stretch things out. But since I wanted to do both of these colors together, I don't need to worry as much. At the end of this sock, I am going to weigh my yarn just to see if I'm close to being halfway through the skeins, so then I will have enough for the second sock. I'm not worried though. I usually have some yarn left over when I do DK socks, so shouldn't be a problem. And my sister's feet are a little smaller than mine, so again, not worried. So that is going along beautifully. The last thing I have been working on, and I haven't worked on it a whole ton this week, has been my Battenberg blanket. I'm taking a little bit of a break from knitting the actual blanket, and well, I'm not even knitting it, I'm crocheting it, but working on the blanket and attaching all the squares, and I'm catching up with all the little squares that I haven't made yet. So during Vlogmas, during the Advent season, I got the Advent from Woolberry on their DK base, and I got all 24 skeins in 50 grams, which in retrospect, I probably would have been fine. I definitely would have been fine if I just done 20 grams instead of 50, but that's okay. And so I did maths and I figured out I needed 8 squares per color. And then like the last 6 colors, I would only need 7 squares. So I was making all these 8 squares and it was just taking a lot of time. So I decided I was only going to make 4 every day, and then I would kind of catch up as needed. So I'm getting to the point where I'm going to need the extra squares. So I've been working on these extras. So these are the navy blue. I finished these ones yesterday. And I started this like peachy color. Where's my face? There we go. Yesterday as well. So I've got one of those done. So I need 3 more of these. And then I need 4 of this pink. And then I'm in like those last 3 colors, last 5 colors. And then I only need 3 more of those. And then I'm done. And then it's just attaching all of these little squares together. It does leave me with about 20 grams per color that's still left over. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I could crochet a blanket with it. I could make some hexagons and add those to my row 1 mini blanket that I still need to finish. I've thought about maybe doing a habitation throw with the minis that are left over. So I have some options. I think I'm going to wait to make a final decision once my Battenberg is completely put together and blocked and done. And then I'll kind of assess from there and see, what do I want to do? What do I have the brain space to do? Because I am trying to work as much of my yarn as possible, especially all the leftovers. I do not want to add 24, leftover of DK weight yarn to my ever-growing stash. So I had a very lovely comment in last week's video about how do I get so much done? And honestly, I limit my projects. I only work on maybe 3 projects at a time. I don't cast on all the things. I want to cast on all the things, don't get me wrong. But I purposely only have 3 projects going at a time. Most of the time, at least one of those is socks. Currently I have 2 pairs of socks and this blanket. But I don't cast on any more than that. One, because too many projects gives me like decision-making fatigue and I can't decide what to work on. I then feel bad that I'm not working on all the things. I also need to have projects that I can transport around with me. So socks, super easy to move around with me. These granny squares, super easy to move around with me because I may be knitting at school, or I may be knitting during a meeting, or that puppy wants back in. I'll be right back. All right, we're back. Sabine is in the room. You can see her right over here in the corner. We'll see if she settles down or not. But anyways, like I was saying, by only having a minimal amount of projects going at one time, I can spend a lot of time working on those projects, which is why I get through them what feels like fairly quickly. But that's just what works for me. I know some people love casting on all the things and they like having options and they like having 8 projects going on at once, and that works for their making. I have friends who only have 1 project going on at a time and they don't keep a stash. Like they only buy the yarn that they need for that 1 project, which is a little too extreme for me, but that's not how I work. So no shame in having multiple projects. There's no shame in having 1 project. There's no shame in having a large stash or a small stash. I would say mine's about in the middle. Right? We are all different and we all work differently, and the things that bring us joy is different. So that's just kind of my thought process. To help with just kind of everything that goes on in my head, I have my knitting journal. I did a whole video about using a knitting journal, how I'm going to start it this year, things that are important to me to track or not track that I learned from last year. I had one question about like, how do you even get started? And my biggest tip for that would be leave it somewhere where you're going to be able to see it all the time. This is a fairly large book, and this is, just started. This is the Hobonichi Cousin in a size A5, and it's a planner, but it also has like these daily like journaling sheets. So I'm doing both my knitting planning in here, and I'm also doing some creative writing and journaling. So this for me is multi-leveled as far as what I'm using it for. But any sort of journal or notebook or planner works out great because it keeps track of what you have, and you can keep track of the things that are important to you. So there you go. If you want to hear more about how I use my knitting journal, how I set it up, what kind of things I keep track of, I will link that video in the cards above, and you can check that out. So what am I reading and what am I watching? I am on Crazy Rich Asians' 2nd book. It is a trilogy. This one's called China Rich Girlfriend by Kwan, and it's been a lot of fun. I have listened to this book before, so I remember kind of what goes on, but I am one who loves rereading things because I miss stuff or I forget things, and going through that book again has just been really great. So I've been listening to that in the car or kind of when I'm doing chores around the house. My kids are listening to Lords and Ladies by Terry Pratchett. It's part of his Discworld series. So those are all books that my husband has read and really enjoyed. So that has been fun reading those with our kids because they have kind of very similar humor as my husband does. And his humor is very similar to Terry Pratchett's. So it's been nice to kind of like, oh, that sounds like something my husband would say or something my husband would do. But it's also been nice to kind of share things that he enjoyed with our kids. I've never read any of these books, so it's fun to be able to experience it for the first time with them as well. Watching, I finished Will Trent. They just started the 3rd season on Disney+, so I think that comes out on Tuesdays. I am one who does not like watching an episode once a week. I would rather wait until the whole series is out and then I can binge watch it all, rather than come back every week at the same time and watch it. I don't know how I survived the 90s and early 2000s when we had to wait once a week for a new episode, but I don't like it. So I probably will watch it, weekly, but it was a bit of a change going from watching multiple episodes at a time to only being able to watch one. But that's okay. I started another series on Netflix called Locke and Key. I know it's been out for a couple years and I just never got around to watching it. So the premise is this family, their father had just passed away, or rather he had been murdered, and so they returned to his family home, and there are a bunch of keys that are hidden around the house, and they're magical keys, and depending on the key, it does certain things. I'm only in like 3 episodes, so I don't have a whole ton of knowledge base beyond that, but I've been enjoying that as well. It's a little suspenseful. I wouldn't say it's scary, but it is suspenseful. So I like suspense. I don't like horror movies or horror shows, but like that kind of psychological thriller I do enjoy. So there's that. All right, life updates. Last week was pretty busy. So on top of my part-time job, I work at a church. I also am a substitute teacher, so I substitute at my kids' school twice a week. So I had one job lined up for a kindergarten class, which I was very excited about, but I didn't have a job for a different day. And I get a last minute call of, can you come in today? We need someone. And so I did. So it was definitely a long week of working, but it was good. And so I didn't get as much knitting time as I would have liked, but that's okay because that's life. This upcoming week is probably going to be a lot of the same, a lot of just coming and going and being busy, and puppy wants out again. If you have puppies or dog, animals of any kind in your home, then we are at the beck and call of our animals. Puppy wanted out again. So anyways, this upcoming week, we just have a ton going on. So I'm not sure how much knitting I'm going to get done. These socks that are in this bag. Oh, this is my Chameleon Melon bag by Slip Slip Sis. They have an Etsy shop. I think she's starting to get like Valentine's stuff ready. So if you are into Valentine's Day knitting bags, keep an eye out for that. But this sock will have its partner, its little mate, by the end of the week. I don't anticipate it taking longer than that. I will finish this first sock this week. I don't remember where I got, well, no, that's a lie. I do know where I got this bag from. Gabs of Slip Slip Sis sent me this bag. She did not make this, but I love that there is that window in the front. And now I want every bag I own to have a window in the front. I don't know where it's from. There's no tag, but I know there are a couple like Etsy shops that do this, that have the window in the front. I love it. But it's got little knitting needles on the back. Isn't that fun? Sorry, I got distracted. That happens a lot. So that's a pair of socks. The first sock will be done this week, and I'll probably get a good chunk of the second sock done. The Granny Squares is going to be an ongoing project. I don't take that outside of the house, so, there's that. For my next cast on, I'm thinking about starting a sweater. That's kind of where my thought process is. I have, I think, 7 sweater lots. And really that means 6. Actually, I have my knitting planner. And in my knitting planner, I have a list of all my stash. I don't have a ton of stash. So it's not a very long list. I think I'm currently up to, hold on, I can check. 68 items. And if it's like a sweater lot, then that counts as 1 item that just happens to have 5 separate pieces to it. I don't have a ton of space to save my yarn in. So my stash has to, out of necessity, stay on the smaller side. I would love to have a giant stash and to have a craft room and to have big cabinets to hold all my yarn, but I can't. So again, if that's where you're at, I love that for you, and I wish I had that too, but I don't. So anyways, I have 7 sweater lots. One of those is actually for a top, and even I will get in real close. It is numbers 8 through 14. Those are all my sweater lots that I own right now. And so I need to work on them. So I'm going to pick one. I think I'm going to roll dice for it. I got this new dice tower. I showed it to you guys earlier, I think in December. So I'm going to roll dice and we're going to pick one and we're going to start a sweater. That's what I think I'm going to do. And that way I can work through those larger lot numbers of yarn that I own. And not burn out on socks like I do every year, especially right after summer sock camp. But anyways, I digress again. We will get through the yarn when we get through the yarn. And if we don't get through it, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. But let's wrap up because I'm starting to ramble a bit. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to spend a little bit of time each week with all of you. Talking about crafts and life and whatnot. This is something I look forward to every week. So check out the different episodes I mentioned today. Check out the rest of the episodes that we have, and I will see you guys next week for episode 61.